So when you think of preserving land, you have to realize that land is the resource base for all of the important natural features that we're trying to protect here on Cape Cod. Of course, our seashores, our coasts, our saltwater embayments, estuaries, those are the critical lifeblood for the marine resources, the fish, the shellfish that are so central here in Chatham. Any kind of wetlands that surround the town's waterfront are important to protect. And the Chatham Conservation Foundation has done an excellent job in acquiring those assets that protect those resources. We also have to look inland too, though, because our freshwater ponds are some of our most important water resources here in Chatham. And the Chatham Conservation Foundation has preserved many shorelines on these beautiful ponds, such as Goose Pond. We have to remember that the freshwater ponds are really a reflection of the groundwater. In the field of conservation biology, bigger is better. We need to connect large tracts of habitat to one another. And so the importance of acquiring one property is magnified when we can add onto it through adjoining properties. The whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts when it comes to wildlife habitat protection. Small parcels that can be acquired in close proximity to each other creates a width and breadth to wildlife habitat that makes the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And the Chatham Conservation Foundation has been able to do just that over the past 50 years.
I feel the foundation is really trying to get current, have visibility. We've owned this building since 1976. We've worked very hard, and I think the people who stop and look at our native meadow out front, there's buzz being on Main Street. There just is. And it's very exciting. We're doing all sorts of branching ourselves out.
Part of the success of the Conservation Foundation has been the people that were involved on the boards, but also the people that we were dealing with and trying to do some land acquisitions. I mean, to a great extent, it is a notably personal transaction. There were a couple of important elements to some of the things that we did. Around Goose Pond, which we've talked already about, the Godwin property, which is municipal. Dr. Douglas Atwood and his wife Minnie, who were Eldridge, she was an Eldridge descendant, had ended up with large land holdings around this part of Goose Pond. Her family is still, her descendants are still maintain a camp on the shore of Goose Pond. They are trying to figure out how to hang on, in essence, but it's hard for them. And what used to be a piece of wood lot or vacant property somewhere in the backwoods of Chatham that wasn't worth a lot is now worth a lot, and people were willing to pay huge sums for it. Well, the foundation was able to successfully negotiate with the Atwood family for this strip here as well as this strip here surrounding Goose Pond. Herring Run, which runs here between Stillwater Pond and Riders Cove. For years, the banks of the Herring Run had been owned by a family that, longtime Chatham family, that we were able to finally negotiate a purchase of the surrounding property. Herring Runs are a little peculiar on the Cape in the sense that the state controls them fairly closely, and there are conservation regulations, state regulations that guide what would occur for development too close to the banks of a herring run. But the family that owned this also lives in that immediate neighborhood, and they were certainly willing to talk with us, and ultimately it was a successful negotiation, which we're very happy about. The foundation had successfully negotiated the acquisition of some former cranberry bog properties in here, but the Acme Laundry Company owned a significant piece of upland alongside Frostfish Creek. and we were trying to negotiate some way to perhaps acquire it. It did not go to our favor, unfortunately, but we were at least able to acquire, some deeded access to the land that we had already owned back there. And Mrs. Heberden was an interesting woman. She owned a home right in this area, almost near the windmill and Chase Park. She also had a lot of the surrounding property. And over time, she let it be known that she would like to make sure that a significant portion of that would remain undeveloped. She did sell out a couple of lots to go to some people for development, but we were able to acquire the surrounding properties over a series of transactions that were, extremely beneficial for conservation purposes, because this overlooks the mill pond and Little Mill Pond, but particularly the Big Mill Pond. Those are very restricted embayments. The nitrogen loading issue in there is significant, and although the town is sewering these areas, this removed the need to sewer some of those lots, which was helpful to the town.
It's a Dugan's Pond. It's kind of it's a wetland, that's for sure. Not much of a pond. And there's 2 or 3 acres there, I guess. And so we abut that, and we benefit every day from the peace and the quiet. And we have deer come across our property. We have ducks. We have come in the winter. We have herons. We can hear frogs. My children grew up playing out in those woods, and so did older generations. As a great guy said, who's in his 90s now, Ben Goodspeed, he grew up in that area too. And I said, wow, and something about Dugan's Pond. It's just the name of that pond. Oh, he said to me, like, oh yeah, yeah, we used to all play down there. And then he looked at me for a minute and said, if those trees could talk. Don't you love that?
Barclay's Pond Trail, which is over in this area here, all of this dark green. There's a fairly extensive trail system through there. Frostfish Creek, which is right here, an extensive trail that runs around it. And we also have, just before Stage Harbor, there's a series of small trails down in here. This is a fairly low-lying piece of land, so you want to be careful about your tides.
Its finest trail is the unofficial Bridge Street Johnson property. The Johnsons were respected in this community because of, I always did. I actually worked for a few years for Ben Teaneck, and she gave us a Christmas bonus. And for a kid, I won't tell you, my wage was $5 an hour. And $5.50, I think, was my top wage, so that was a big deal. So getting $50 was a big thing. But they always kept a low profile, and the Conservation Foundation has that property, multiple properties together, and it really is an amazing natural landscape. And it needs to just be left like that. It does have invasives in it, but that's where the wildlife go. If there's, it's amazing that Chatham has the wildlife it does, and it's because there's these little pockets. Little innocuous pockets, like on Seaview Street, there's a little swamp down below. There's muskrat in there, but there's probably a snapping turtle and they're gonna go down in there to winter. Snapping in the little pond on Chatham Bars Ave at the golf course. I've seen a snapper going down Old Harbor Road, and I had to stop, and I knew where he was going, but I couldn't really get to that, so I put him somewhere else, which really I shouldn't have done. He should have stayed in the area that he was from.
Purchased. When I was a young boy growing up, we could drive our vehicles down through the woods and all the way down here. This was connected, and you could drive our vehicles. So I was very familiar with this. Is called Harding's Beach. I was very familiar with this piece of property because we had vehicles that we would drive down here and drive all through this. So that was a very good project to be able to buy. Even though it's sand, it was very nice to acquire all that property to protect, because we know that eventually someone would get a permit to build houses on that piece of land. So that,
Even in the 50s, right, there were opportunities to do things somewhat like that. Right? I mean, places like the area around Goose Pond, right, were completely undeveloped, except for a camp here and there. And if you wanted, you could take an old truck or a car down there and drive around. You could get down. It was relatively easy to go onto Monomoy and drive all the way down to the south and come back. You could drive around Morris Island once the dike was put in, but previous to that, there had also been a barge that would take vehicles over there. And of course, going down North Beach, Nauset Beach, we did that all the time. And once you were on the beach, it didn't seem to matter if you had a driver's license or not.